All right, gang, we are looking at chapter 19 this week. We're going to learn future active and middle indicative. I think you're going to find that the information in this chapter is easier to memorize than some other stuff because you've really sort of already memorized paradigm for this. You just don't know it. Um, so I think you're going to find maybe you can breathe a sigh of relief. Um, for this chapter, and then we'll discuss a future of a me, which is I am. That's going to be something new that you're going to have to memorize. That's a paradigm you're going to have to memorize because it doesn't really look as much like a me, but you'll see what I'm talking about. But there's a lot of other sort of ancillary information in uh, this week's lecture that you need to know um, because you're learning the language and it's going to help you later. Um, But as always, what I want you to focus most of your attention on is vocabulary and learning the paradigms. That is what I want you to focus most of your attention on. But I do want you to learn some of this, what I call ancillary stuff, because I want you to understand what's happening with the language. So, what I'll be doing tonight, we'll be jumping around in the textbook just a little bit, but I'll be just reading from the textbook when we get to some of these sections because a lot of times I try to simplify, um, the way that he puts it in the textbook. I try to simplify it, but some of the stuff we're going to cover tonight, um, really, it's better to just read from the textbook so that you can get it straight from him. But let's get started. Um, in the English, future describes a future action. So future tense, we have that in English, is formed by adding will or shall. So if you wonder, this is just trivia that won't be on the test. If you wonder when you should use will or when you should use shall, typically shall is something that you use in the first person. I shall do this, I shall do that. We will, they will, he will. So shall is usually, first person. Um, but it's not really something we use as much. Sort of an older English word. So the future tense in English is formed by adding will. I will go, I will eat, I will study. So in those sentences, go is the verb, right? And that verb is future active indicative. I will go, I will eat, I will study. But in English, the form of the verb doesn't change. You just add the modifier will and it changes the tense. So I will go, I will eat, I will study. That's all future action. So in Greek, future tense has the same meaning as in English. The only difference is that in the future tense in the Greek, we're going to call it undefined. The aspect is undefined. So these future tense Greek terms that you're learning, or the paradigm that you're learning this week, um, you will say, "I will see," like blepo, I see, "I will see," or "I will be," not "I will be seeing." So you're not going to do the "I will be seeing." That's a different tense. So the Greek future tense that we're learning this week is simple, undefined. I will see. Good example of that is Matthew 19:19. You will love your neighbor as yourself. You're learning that tense this week, future tense. So one of the things that he introduces, even though you've been doing this, you just didn't know it. You didn't know that you knew this. But we're going to cover this twice in this lecture now, just to introduce it, and then I'll dive a little deeper in slide 8. But if you want to look in your textbook in sections 19.3 and 4, that's chapter 19, verse 3 and 4, he introduces that there are 4 patterns of verbal roots. And sometimes we use the word root and stem interchangeably. They're not exactly interchangeably, but we tend to use them interchangeably. So verbs in Greek follow four patterns. And so this week we're focusing on pattern one. Now, what is pattern one? Pattern one is a verb whose root is not altered when you form the present tense stem. So that means that the root, the present tense stem, and the future tense stem are identical. So in a category one or a pattern one verb, you have the same root for the present, the future, and the aorist. Here's an example using lu, present active indicative luo, I loose, future active indicative, which you are learning this week, I will loose, and then the first aorist active indicative, which you haven't learned yet, elusa, you see you're getting a glimpse into the future here because you see that in the first aorist, you're adding a prefix and a suffix. So lu remains constant in pattern one. So that's all that means. We don't need to get any more difficult than that. Just know that in Greek verbs, there are four patterns, and pattern one means that the root or the stem does not change in these tenses, the present active, future active, or first aorist active indicative. You see lu remains the same, but you just add the suffix or the suffix and the prefix. Okay. Before you're done with this course, you will learn 7 verb tenses. You have already learned the present, and you're learning the future active. So you learned present active, present middle, and present passive, right? So that's present. And now you're learning the future active. So there are 7. And again, if you want to glimpse into the future, you can see what happens to these verb tenses to change them to the various, you see what happens to these roots or these stems when you're dealing with the various tenses. So agapao is present. Agapone is imperfect. So you see that in that, you're going to have to learn that alpha is lengthened to an eta. Don't worry about it. We'll get there. You'll learn it. It's a paradigm. But you can see here, these are the tenses that you will learn before the Lord finally delivers you from this course next semester. Now, here's something that's interesting. This is just for your FYI. At some point in this course, you're going to be looking to lexicons to do some of your work. You'll be learning how to use a Greek lexicon. And he's just introducing this here in section 19.16. I'm not going to test you on this. This is not going to show up in a quiz. This is just FYI. And we're going to use luo as an example. But what you may see in a lexicon, if you look up a verb, you may see this. Now, you recognize luo, and after tonight, you're going to recognize luso, but it's going to be labeled the same way in all your lexicons. The only difference would be is if a particular verb is not available in one of these tenses, then you may just find a dash or a space. But this is the form that you're going to see in a lexicon. The first form of the verb that you're going to see, if it's available, it could be one of those middle or deponent verbs that we learned about last week that only show up in the future or the middle or passive. But you're going to find present active indicative first, and then future active indicative, aorist active indicative, perfect active indicative, perfect middle and present, and aorist present indicative. So that's the way it'll be formed in the in the lexicon. That's something that is just FYI. At some point, when you start digging through a lexicon, we'll revisit this, but just so that you know, if you open up your lexicon, you're doing study for a lesson or a sermon or something like that, and you're trying to dig deeper into the Greek and you see that, you're like, I don't know what that means. Well, that's what that means. I told you we were going to look at this again. Um, if you look in on page 9 on 198, section 19.4, within pattern one. So we said there are four patterns of how the root is used in verbs. We're learning pattern one. Within pattern one, there are three categories. There are verbs that the stem ends in an iota or an upsilon. You could see a kuo, a kuso. You see that? That is where the stem ends in an iota or upsilon. So that's one category. The other category is contract verbs. 1 and 2 you've already had experience with. And the third category is stems ending in a stop. And we'll look at that again in just a minute. But a stop is typically a certain consonant. And where you have to start thinking about stems that end in a stop, which is typically a consonant, is if you remember when you're putting your verbs together, and we'll just look at the next one. Let's just look at this next one. So we're going to be talking about future active tonight. You have the stem. Now, in this case, you have a connecting vowel, which is a sigma. But then you have that connecting vowel, right? So we'll go back up a slide. So in stems ending in a stop, so look at the bottom blip. That stem ends in a P sound, right? A pi. Well, if you want to do the future active, you're going to have to add a sigma. And again, you're going to learn the paradigm in just a minute. And we're going to talk about this more in depth in just a minute. But in Greek, when you have that bleps sound, right? You add that sigma. We'll just do English, B-L-E-P-S, that sound. In Greek, they lengthen that to a psi. I'm going to show you a chart in just a minute. And if you think about it phonetically, think about the sound that they make, it'll make a lot more sense. And we'll cover it in just a minute more in detail. But this slide is just letting you know that within that category one, within that pattern one, there are three categories. And here are the three categories. Stems ending in an iota or an upsilon, contract verbs, and then stems ending in a stop. All right. So let's look at the future active indicative. I will study. So in the future active indicative, you have the stem. And again, we're going to use lu. You have the tense formative. That's what that sigma is called, a tense formative. You have your connecting vowel. And then you have your active personal ending. So if you wanted to say, I will loose, it becomes loosamen. Because you have the stem, you have the tense formative. Tense formative is just a really fancy way to say that that's a signal to you that that word is getting ready to form a certain tense. So what you're going to do, let's just go ahead and look at the paradigm for future active indicative. You already know this. That is essentially present active indicative paradigm with the sigma added after the stem. So when you learned present active indicative, you learned luo, lues, lue, luamen, luete, luusi. Well, if that's present active indicative, I loose. But if you wanted to make that I will loose, then you're going to just add the sigma. Luso, luces, luce, lusamen, lucete, lususi. So see what I mean? Not that difficult if you learned present active indicative. This is why learning the stem is so important. Because as we go, what you're going to find is you're going to find that we're going to be adding prefixes, right? Sometimes that prefix will be a lambda and another letter. So you just need to make sure that you recognize the stem of these verbs, because recognizing that stem helps you to pick out what tense it is instead of always trying to flip back and look at the previous paradigm. So this is future active indicative. I will loose, you will loose, he will loose, we will loose, y'all will loose. You know how much I love that. And they will loose. So um, within the future active indicative, you have contract verbs. You guys remember contract verbs, where you have um, the sounds that come together and it lengthens. And the three examples you have here are agapa, poi, et, poie, and plero. And you'll just have to memorize these contract verbs. But you can see that agapa, agapaso is lengthened to agapeso. Poieo, which is what you learned, becomes poieso, and it just lengthens that eta, that lengthens that epsilon to an eta. And plero, or plera, really, pleraso, it lengthens that omicron to an omega. So we talked about the stems ending in a stop. So if the stem, now remember, in the future, you add that in the future active indicative, you're adding a sigma, right? And the example we used was blep, the stem blep of blepo. Blepo is the verb, or the present active indicative verb. Stem is blep. So the stem ends in a stop, and in the future, you have to add the sigma. So when you add the sigma to the pi, the beta, or the phi, sound it out. The pi and the sigma, the beta and the sigma, bzz, and then the phi and the sigma, bzz. It already sounds like a sigh, right? That's all they're doing. That's all they're just lengthening it for um, so that the letter matches the sound that you're getting. And you can see and we don't worry about the names, labial, velar, or dental. Don't worry about that. That's just how you say it, how your mouth moves when you say it. But you can see that the chi, the gamma, and the kappa, the gamma, and the chi, when connected to a sigma, produces the xe sound, right? Like a cat, or when you hit a spray bottle. I guess that's what I was thinking of. You spray a cat with a spray bottle. I guess when you hate cats like I do, you do, but maybe you don't. All right, and then dental, you got the tau, the delta, and the theta. Again, those just become a sigma. All right, so that is future active indicative. I'm going to hit that paradigm one more time so that you can see that. It's essentially the present active indicative, but you're adding the sigma. When you add that sigma to a stem that ends in one of these letters, then that sigma becomes this, right? So you may see a word, if we were doing blepo, right? You would not see blepso with a sigma, you would see it with a psi, because the P and the sigma becomes the psi. So it would sound the same, but it would just be spelled differently. All right, so that's future active. I will study. I will go. I will loose. So now we have future middle indicative. You have the same thing. If you remember your present, middle, and passive. Erkomai was the big example that we used. Well, when you're forming the future middle indicative, you have your stem, your tense formative, which is a sigma. You have a connecting vowel, in this case, the omicron. And then you have the personal ending. So Peru plus a sigma plus an omicron plus mai becomes Perusamai. And here is the paradigm. You've already learned this paradigm, or you're in the middle of learning this paradigm, because we just talked about it, I think, last lecture or so. This is essentially the present, middle, and passive with a sigma. And those same rules apply if the stem ends in a stop. You'll see that sigma become either a psi or an xz, or it'll stay a sigma if the stem ends in a tau, a delta, or a theta. Let me go back to the paradigm. This is the paradigm you'll learn. So it's really not a new paradigm you're learning. You're still going to be learning that other paradigm, but this just helps you. If you see that sigma, then you know that you're dealing with a future middle indicative. If you remember from last lecture, we talked about the middle only or the deponent verbs. These are verbs that appear in just the middle form. We call them deponent or middle only. One of the things that he points out, if you want to look in section 19.19, this really has more to do with looking in the lexicon. It doesn't really have a ton to do with translation, but it does. But I think that you'll get through it if you don't master this. But what he points out is if you have a verb that is middle only in the present, that doesn't mean it's middle only in the future. But it probably is. How do you know? You look in the lexicon. Remember that list I gave you of those words that appear in the lexicon? If the second tense ends in omai, that means you're dealing with a middle only or a deponent. If you understood that, I just want you to file it away in something that I may need later, because you're not going to need it for any test or any quiz this semester. This is just something that if you're learning the language, you need to know. So we've talked a lot. I said there was a lot of ancillary stuff in this chapter. Here's the important thing you need to know from this chapter. You need to know this paradigm, future active indicative. You need to know this paradigm, future middle indicative. And you need to know that if your stem ends in one of these letters, when it connects with an S, it makes the letter at the end. So if a pi, beta, or phi ends with, or if the stem ends with that letter, when you add the S, instead of keeping the consonant and the sigma, you change it to a psi. And it's that simple. Clear as mud. Okay, so now this is something new for you. So in section 19.14, you see that he has given you the future of a me. Remember, a me is I am, right? The helping the to be verbs. They look differently in the future. So this is new, and you need to remember, you need to memorize this. So SOMI, I will be, because remember, you just add the will in the future. SOMI, I will be. SA with the iota subscript, that is you will be. STI, he will be. Samatha, we will be. SSThe, you will be. And Santai, they will be. You can see those endings are those middle endings, right? For the present middle passive and the future middle. But the problem you're going to have is you've learned the forms of a me in the present, I am. You haven't learned this. And I would treat these, um, I would treat these like a new paradigm. So if you remember that the root is epsilon sigma for the future of a me, get what I'm saying here? So if the root of the future verb a me is not epsilon iota, it's epsilon sigma. If you just remember that, if you remember that the future of a me, the stem is epsilon sigma, and then so if you see an epsilon and a sigma, and you see those middle endings, that you know you're dealing with a me future a me. I don't know if that helps or not. You're also welcome to just memorize this paradigm. But I think it'd be helpful. It'd be easier probably since you're already memorizing this paradigm for present middle and passive and future middle. Just remember that if you see that epsilon sigma and then those future middle or present middle endings, that you're dealing with the future of a me. And it's I will be, you will be, he will be, so on and so forth. So you have, again, we'll just hit it really quickly. You need to learn this paradigm, future active indicative. You need to learn this paradigm, future middle indicative, but you're not really learning something new. You're just adding that sigma. You need to keep in mind that if that stem ends with one of these letters, it becomes something else, right? And it's all based on how it sounds. And then you need to memorize the future of a me. But if you learn that the future stem of a me is S, and you can spot those endings, it's going to help you translate it. Because I guarantee you this is going to trip you up. It trips everybody up. It'll get you because it doesn't show up as a vocabulary word, and you're like, what in the world is that? You'll see the oh my, you'll see the amatha, and you'll be like, I think that's future middle. But if you forget that that ES or the epsilon sigma is the stem of a me, then you're going to get tripped up on that. And you're just going to leave it blank on a test. You're like, I have no idea what that is. And then when I show you the translation, you're going to be like, yeah, he said memorize epsilon sigma. And then I'm going to say, that's right. I told you so. You should listen to me more. And we're going to make a big thing out of it. Okay, so let's do the vocabulary words now. Not many, because you have other stuff to memorize, but let's get through them. Here's a word you've seen in another form before. You've seen kingdom, but now here is king. Basileus, king. Basileus. Genao, I beget, give birth to, or produce. Genao. Zao, I live. Judea, Judea. That's easy, right? You sound it out. You're like, okay. Here's another easy one. Judaios, Judaios. As an adjective, it means Jewish, and as a noun, it means Jew. This one's really tough. Israele, or Israel. Israel. Karpos means fruit or crop, also result, like the fruit of your labors, something like the result of your labors. Karpos means fruit. Metzon means greater. See that rough breathing mark there? Holos or halos. As an adjective, it means whole. It's easy to remember. Holos, whole. You hear the word whole in there, right? Whole or complete, or the adverb is entirely. You're going to see it mostly as an adjective. Holos or halos. And then proskuneo. Proskuneo means I worship. All right. So that is chapter 19. That is future active indicative, future middle indicative, and future of a me. So I'm going to stop sharing. All right, that clears mud.
Yep.
Easy peasy, right? You probably don't even need to recognize. You probably don't need to study that. But seriously,
Nope.
if you've got present active indicative, even if you've got it 75%, just look for that sigma. You look for that sigma, that's going to help you. Right. All right, guys. I'm going to stop recording.